I remember the sound of the spoon falling. A small sound, but it was the one that shattered everything inside me. My son's hand met my face because the soup had no salt. The next morning, he brought me makeup and told me to hide it, to smile, to be charismatic for his fiancée. I did what he asked, like I always did. But when that young woman walked through my door, I saw something in her eyes that made my blood run cold at recognition. A knowing, a silent scream that matched my own. What I didn't know then was that she hadn't come into my life by accident. She carried a photograph from 20 years ago, a secret that connected us in ways I couldn't have imagined. And when she whispered those 4 words at my door, "I know who you are," everything I thought I understood about my son, about myself, about the lies we tell to survive, began to unravel. This is the story of how 2 women, separated by decades but united by the same kind of pain, found the courage to speak the truth that everyone around us wanted to keep silent. Some stories don't have easy answers. Some loves become prisons we build ourselves. And sometimes, the bravest thing a mother can do is walk away from her own child. If you have ever loved someone who hurt you, if you have ever wondered where the line is between loyalty and survival, then this story is for you. Stay with me until the end. You will never forget what happens when the truth finally comes to light. Please follow the channel, leave a like, and comment below telling me where you are watching from. Your support means everything. I remember the sound of the spoon falling. A small sound, but it was the one that shattered everything inside me. The bowl was still steaming on the table, the smell of vegetables rising with the vapor, and I, like every foolish mother, waited to hear a thank you. But what came instead was the blow. Dry, precise. My own son's open palm met my face. For an instant, the world went silent. The clock on the wall stopped. The spoon kept rocking on the floor, as if mocking me. He looked at me with those empty eyes I no longer recognized. Dan said in the calm voice of someone who believes he's entitled, "No salt." That was all. And then he went back to eating, as if nothing had happened. I stood there, my face burning, the taste of blood in my mouth, my heart begging not to collapse. He had a disorder, I told myself. It was the medication, the exhaustion, the work stress. It was everything except him. That night, when I heard the creaking of the bed and his heavy snoring, I went to the bathroom and applied the cheapest foundation I could find. My hands trembled as I traced over the red mark that was already turning purple along my left cheekbone. In the mirror, under the harsh fluorescent light, I looked like a stranger wearing my face. The woman staring back at me had learned to paint over pain, to apply concealer not just to bruises but to truth itself. I was 62 years old, living in a modest ranch house in Bakersfield, California, where the summer heat could kill you and the winters felt like they'd never end. My husband had died 7 years prior a heart attack while mowing the lawn on a Sunday afternoon in June. One moment he was there, wiping sweat from his forehead. The next, he was gone. Michael, our only son, had been 30 then. He'd cried at the funeral, held my hand, promised he'd take care of me, and for a while he did. But something changed after he started his new job at the oil company downtown. The promotions came fast, too fast. Maybe with them came the pressure, the late nights, the medication his psychiatrist prescribed for the bipolar disorder we'd only recently named. Before that, we just called it Michael's moods. The highs where he'd stay up all night reorganizing the garage or planning elaborate business ventures. The lows where he wouldn't leave his room for days. The violence was new, or maybe I just hadn't wanted to see it before. The next morning, I was folding laundry in the living room when I heard his footsteps on the stairs. My body tensed automatically, a response I hated recognizing in myself. But when he appeared in the doorway, he was smiling. In his hands was a small shopping bag from Walgreens, the plastic crinkling as he approached. "Here, Mom." He set it on the coffee table between us, next to the stack of his work shirts I'd just pressed. "New makeup, better than that drugstore stuff you've been using." I looked inside. There were 3 items. A foundation, 2 shades too light for my skin, a coral lipstick I'd never wear, and a pressed powder compact with a small mirror. The price tags were still attached. He'd spent $47. "Thank you, sweetie," I heard myself say, my voice steady and warm, as if my son hadn't struck me less than 24 hours before, as if the bruise on my face wasn't throbbing beneath yesterday's hasty cover-up. He sat down on the arm of the couch, and for a moment, he looked like the boy I'd raised, the one who'd brought me dandelions from the backyard, who'd cried when his goldfish died, who'd stayed up with me during thunderstorms because I was afraid of lightning. "Listen, Mom." His voice shifted, taking on that particular tone that meant he needed something. My fiancée is coming over for lunch on Sunday. Her name's Rebecca. I want you to meet her before things get official. Fiancée, the word landed like a stone in my stomach. He'd never mentioned dating anyone seriously. I didn't know you were seeing someone, I said carefully, folding one of his shirts with mechanical precision. It's been a few months. She works in HR at the company. She's single quotes S double quotes. He paused, searching for words. She's good for me, Mom. She keeps me balanced, and I think she might be the one. There was something desperate in the way he said it, as if he was trying to convince himself as much as me. That's wonderful. Michael, I'm happy for you. The lies came so easily now. I need you to make this lunch perfect, okay? His jaw tightened slightly. Make that pot roast you used to do, the one with the carrots and potatoes. And clean the house, really clean it. I want her to see that we, single quotes, read ... he gestured vaguely. That we're a good family. Normal. The word hung in the air between us like a ghost, and Mom, he picked up the makeup bag, holding it out to me. Where this look nice, be ... charismatic. You know, smile, laugh at her jokes. Make her feel welcome. I took the bag from his hands, our fingers brushing for just a moment. His skin was cold. Of course, honey, I'll make everything perfect. He stood up, seemed about to say something else, then thought better of it. As he headed back upstairs, I heard him whistling a tuneless melody that echoed through the house. I sat there alone with the makeup bag in my lap, staring at the foundation that wouldn't match my skin. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Patterson next door watering her roses. She'd lived there for 30 years, had watched Michael grow up, had brought casseroles after my husband died. She waved, and I waved back, holding my smile until she turned away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the house settle around me, and thought about Sunday, about meeting this Rebecca, about pretending everything was fine while wearing makeup chosen to hide what my son had done. In the darkness, I whispered a prayer I hadn't said since I was a child. Please, God, let this be different. Let her save him. But deep in my heart, in that place where mothers know things they wish they didn't, I understood something terrible. The worst pain isn't from the slap itself. It's from continuing to love the one who's destroying you slowly, piece by piece, day by day. And somewhere in that same dark space, a tiny voice whispered something even worse. What if I'm not the only one he hurts? The spoon was still on the kitchen floor. I'd seen it there before bed, but couldn't bring myself to pick it up. It lay there in the darkness like evidence of a crime no one would ever prosecute, waiting for morning light to make it real again. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of brightness that feels almost offensive when your soul is dark. I had been awake since 4:30, unable to sleep, my mind racing through everything that needed to be done. By 5, I was already in the kitchen, pulling out my mother's old roasting pantha, heavy cast iron one she'd given me as a wedding gift 40 years ago. Its weight in my hands felt like an anchor, something solid to hold on to. The pot roast would take hours. I seasoned the meat carefully, my fingers remembering the motions, even as my mind wandered. Garlic, thyme, black pepper, and yes, salt. Plenty of salt. I massaged it into the beef with trembling hands, watching the crystals disappear into the flesh, and felt a bitter laugh catch in my throat. By 7, the house smelled like Sunday dinners from my childhood, that rich, warm scent of meat and vegetables that used to mean safety, family, love. Now it just smelled like a stage set, a performance I was directing for an audience of people, pretending we were something we weren't. I cleaned every room like I was erasing evidence. I scrubbed the bathroom sink until the porcelain gleamed, wiped down baseboards I'd ignored for months, vacuumed the living room carpet in perfect diagonal lines that reminded me of the way they mow baseball fields. Michael had loved baseball as a kid. I'd driven him to Little League practice 3 times a week, sat in those aluminum bleachers through scorching valley summers, cheered until my voice went hoarse. That boy felt like someone I'd invented, a character from a story I'd once believed was mine. At 9, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror with the makeup he'd bought me. The foundation was called Porcelain Dream, a name that would have made me laugh if I could remember how. I applied it carefully, watching my bruise disappear beneath the too light coverage, creating a ghostly pattern that made me look sick rather than healed. The coral lipstick went on next. In the compact's tiny mirror, I looked like someone dressed up as a mother, wearing a costume of normalcy. I chose my nicest Sunday dress, a navy blue cotton number with small white flowers that I'd worn to my husband's cousin's wedding 3 years ago. It still fit, though I'd lost weight lately. Food didn't taste like much anymore. I added the pearl earrings Tom had given me for our 25th anniversary, the ones I only wore for special occasions. What was this, if not special? My son's fiancée coming to inspect the woman who'd raised the man she planned to marry. By 11, everything was ready. The pot roast rested on the counter, vegetables glistening around it. I'd made my grandmother's apple pizza one with a lattice crust. That took forever to weave, but always impressed. The dining room table was set with our good china. The plates with the blue rim that we'd registered for at Macy's, back when I still believed in happily ever after. Fresh flowers from the grocery store yellow daisies, because they looked cheerful, sat in a vase in the center. The house looked like something from a magazine, like everything was fine. Michael came downstairs at 11:30, showered and dressed in khakis and a button-down shirt I'd ironed the day before. He looked handsome, put together, normal. He surveyed the dining room, nodded once, then looked at me with a critical eye that made me stand up straighter automatically. "Good," he said. "You look nice, Mom. Just ... Try to relax. Okay. Don't be weird. Don't be weird." As if I was the problem. As if my face still aching under the makeup was somehow my fault for being weird about being hit. "I'll do my best. Honey," I heard myself say in that same pleasant, accommodating voice I'd perfected over the past few months. The doorbell rang at exactly noon. Rebecca was punctual, at least. Michael rushed to answer it, and I smoothed my dress one more time, pressed my lips together to set the lipstick, and arranged my face into what I hoped looked like warm, maternal welcome rather than the terror that was coursing through my veins. She walked in smiling, and the first thing I noticed was how young she was. 28, maybe 30 at most. She had that fresh-faced prettiness of someone who hadn't yet learned what the world could do to use smooth skin. Bright eyes, hope radiating from her like heat from pavement in summer. She wore a light blue sundress that swayed when she moved, and sandals that showed her pedicured toes painted coral, the same shade as my lipstick. I wondered if that was intentional, if Michael had told her what to wear, what color would match his mother. "Mrs. Morrison." She extended her hand, and her grip was firm, confident. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you. Michael talks about you all the time." I wondered what version of me lived in those talks. What stories he told about the woman who'd raised him, who'd sacrificed everything, who now wore makeup to hide his handiwork. "Please, call me Eleanor," I said, and my voice sounded almost normal. Come in, come in. Lunch is just about ready." She smelled like jasmine and something else, something expensive that reminded me of department store perfume counters. As she walked past me into the dining room, chattering about how lovely the house was, how delicious everything smelled, I caught Michael's eye. He nodded at me, a tiny gesture of approval that made me feel simultaneously relieved and disgusted with myself. We sat down to eat, Michael at the head of the table like he was already the man of the house. Rebecca to his right, me to his left. The arrangement felt symbolic somehow, like we were positioned on opposing sides of him, each trying to pull him in our direction. Rebecca talked through most of the meal. She was in HR at the oil company, she told me, had been there for 3 years after getting her master's degree from Fresno State. She'd grown up in Visalia, just an hour south, had 2 younger brothers who were a handful, and parents who'd been married for 35 years. "They're my relationship goals," she said, looking at Michael with adoration that made my stomach turn. "I want what they have. That kind of stability, you know? That partnership." Michael reached over and took her hand, brought it to his lips, and kissed it. The gesture was tender, romantic hand. I saw Rebecca's eyes go soft with emotion. But I also saw something else. Just for a moment, when their fingers interlaced, I saw her wince. It was tiny, barely there, but I'd spent months learning to read pain in the smallest movements. Her thumb was bruised, I realized. The kind of bruise you get when someone grips too hard, when affection crosses into possession. "The pot roast is incredible, Mrs. Morrison," Rebecca said, taking another bite. "You'll have to teach me your recipe. I want to learn all Michael's favorite meals." "She salts it perfectly," Michael said, and there was an edge to his voice that made the words feel like a warning. "Not too much, not too little. Just right," Rebecca laughed, but it sounded forced. Michael's very particular about his food. "I'm still learning." We ate in relative silence for a few moments, just the sound of forks against china, the clock ticking in the hallway, the air conditioner humming through the vents. Then Rebecca set down her fork, dabbed her lips with her napkin, and looked directly at me. Our eyes met, and in that instant, something passed between us: a recognition, a understanding, a knowing that made my blood run cold. "May I use your restroom?" she asked softly. "Of course, dear." "Top of the stairs, first door on the right." She excused herself, and I watched her walk away, her blue dress swaying, her hand touching the wall as she climbed the stairs as if she needed support. Michael was checking his phone, scrolling through work emails, oblivious. I began clearing plates, and that's when I noticed Rebecca's purse. Still sitting on the chair where she'd left it, the zipper was partially open, and inside I could see the edge of something familiar. A pamphlet, the kind printed on colored paper. The kind we used to hand out at the women's shelter where I'd volunteered for 15 years. My hands froze, a plate suspended in midair. Rebecca was upstairs for 7 minutes. I know because I counted every second. My heart pounding, my mind racing through impossible connections. When she came back down, her eyes were red-rimmed and slightly puffy, like she'd been crying. Her lipstick was smudged at the corner. Hastily reapplied, she smiled brightly, too brightly, and sat back down. "Everything okay?" Michael asked, barely looking up from his phone. "Perfect," she said. "Just fixing my makeup." The rest of lunch passed in a blur of forced conversation and hollow laughter. But I couldn't stop staring at Rebecca. Couldn't stop seeing the bruise on her thumb, the pamphlet in her purse, the way she flinched slightly when Michael put his arm around her shoulders as we stood to say goodbye at the door. "Thank you so much for having me," she said, hugging me. And in that embrace, with her mouth close to my ear, she whispered so quietly I almost missed it, "I know who you are." Then she pulled back, smiling as if nothing had happened, and let Michael walk her to her car. I stood in the doorway, my heart hammering against my ribs, watching them kiss goodbye in the driveway, watching her drive away in a silver Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper. And I realized with absolute certainty, this wasn't a coincidence. The past I'd tried so hard to bury had just walked through my door wearing a blue sundress and my son's engagement ring. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rebecca's face, that mixture of recognition and fear, hope and desperation. I heard her whispered words echoing in the darkness. "I know who you are." At 3 in the morning, I gave up trying and went downstairs to make chamomile tea, the kind my mother used to brew when I couldn't sleep as a child. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. Through the kitchen window, I could see the streetlight casting long shadows across our front yard, making the oak tree look like a twisted figure reaching toward the house. I sat at the kitchen table, wrapping my hands around the warm mug, and let myself remember. The shelter had been called Haven House. It operated out of a converted Victorian on the east side of Bakersfield, painted pale yellow with white trim, trying to look cheerful despite the broken women who came through its doors. I'd started volunteering there in 2003, right after Michael graduated high school and left for community college. Tom was still alive then, still healthy, and he'd encouraged it. "You've got all this love to give, Ellie," he'd said, "and now that Michael's gone, you need somewhere to put it." So I'd put it into Haven House. For 15 years, I taught women how to fill out job applications, how to open bank accounts their husbands didn't know about, how to pack a bag in under 3 minutes. I held their hands while they cried, watched their children in the playroom while they met with lawyers, drove them to court dates and job interviews and new apartments where they could start over. I remembered so many faces. Maria, who'd arrived with 3 children and a broken collarbone. Jennifer, whose husband had put her in the hospital twice before she finally left. Diane, who'd shown up at 2 in the morning with nothing but the clothes on her back and a black eye the size of a fist. But try as I might, sitting there in my dark kitchen, I couldn't remember Rebecca. The next morning, Monday, Michael left for work early. He'd been distant after Rebecca left the day before, barely speaking through dinner, disappearing into his room with his laptop and his medication. I'd heard him on the phone late into the night, his voice low and urgent, but couldn't make out the words through his closed door. After his car pulled out of the driveway, I did something I'd never done before. I went into his room. It felt like trespassing, invading sacred space, even though this was my house and I'd cleaned this very room 1,000 times. But Michael was 37 years old now, and his room had long ago stopped being the place where I tucked in my little boy and read him stories about trains and dinosaurs. Now it was a stranger's space, neat and impersonal, like a hotel room. His bed was made with military precision. Clothes hung in the closet, organized by color. Desk clear except for his work laptop and a framed photo of him and Rebecca at some company event. They looked happy in it. Her head was tilted toward him, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling at whoever was taking the picture. I studied her face in the photo, trying to place her in my memories of Haven House. She looked different, her younger somehow. Despite this being a recent photo, unburdened. Or maybe just better at hiding the burden. I was about to leave when I noticed something on his nightstand. A small leather notebook, the kind with the elastic band that wraps around to keep it closed. I knew I shouldn't. I knew it was wrong. I opened it anyway. The first pages were work, notes, meeting times, project deadlines, names and phone numbers. Then came personal entries, written in Michael's careful handwriting, the same precise letters I'd watched him learn in first grade. Rebecca is perfect for where I'm going. She understands ambition. She won't hold me back. Like the sentence ended there, unfinished, but I knew what word came next. Like mom. I flipped through more pages, my hands shaking, looking for something but not knowing what. Then I found it. Dated 3 weeks ago, Rebecca has baggage. Told me today about her past. Some shelter she stayed at before. Makes her grateful for stability. Makes her less likely to leave when things get difficult. This could work in my favor. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. My son, my baby boy, had chosen a woman because he thought her trauma would make her easier to control. I closed the notebook, put it back exactly where I'd found it, and left his room. But the words followed me, branded into my brain. That afternoon, I couldn't stay in the house. I drove to Target, pretending I needed things I didn't, wandering the aisles in a daze. In the makeup section, I stopped in front of the foundation display, looking at the porcelain dream that Michael had bought me, still sitting in stacks on the shelf. I picked up a bottle, felt its weight, then set it back down. When I got home, there was an envelope wedged in the screen door. No stamp, no address, just my name, written in careful cursive, Eleanor. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a photograph, old and creased. The colors faded in that way photos from the early 2000s get when they've been carried around too long. It showed the front steps of Haven House. In the photo, I stood in the center, surrounded by 8 women of various ages. We were all smiling, the kind of smiles that come after surviving something terrible, after realizing you're still standing. It had been taken at our annual summer barbecue. I remembered suddenly. We'd made it a tradition, a celebration of strength and new beginnings. I recognized Maria on my left, Jennifer on my right. And there, kneeling in the front row, was a girl who couldn't have been more than 18. She had thin arms wrapped around her knees, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. She wasn't quite smiling, more like she was trying to remember how. It was Rebecca. The recognition hit me like a physical blow. I sank down onto the porch steps, the photo clutching in my shaking hands. And the memories came flooding back. Becca. That's what she'd called herself then. Just Becca. She'd arrived at Haven House on a scorching July afternoon in 2005. Brought in by a police officer who'd found her walking along Highway 99 with a duffel bag and a split lip. She'd been living with her boyfriend, a man 12 years older who'd promised to take care of her after her parents kicked her out for dropping out of high school. I remembered now. I'd spent hours with her, teaching her to read better, helping her study for her GED. She'd been so hungry to learn, so desperate to become someone different than the scared girl who'd walked through our doors. She'd stayed at Haven House for 4 months, longer than most, because she had nowhere else to go. And then one morning, she was just gone, left a note thanking us, saying she'd gotten a job at a restaurant in Fresno, that she was going to make something of herself, that she'd never forget what we'd done for her. I'd thought about her sometimes over the years, hoping she was okay, that she'd found her way. And now she was marrying my son. I turned the photo over. On the back, written in that same careful cursive, was a message. You saved me once. Now I need to know, do you need saving too? The words swam before my eyes as tears finally spilled over, running down my cheeks and dripping onto the photo, onto that younger version of Becca who'd believed in fresh starts and second chances. I sat there on my porch as the afternoon sun beat down, as Mrs. Patterson drove by and waved without stopping, as the mail truck made its rounds, as life continued around me in its ordinary way. But nothing was ordinary anymore. The girl I'd helped save 20 years ago had found her way back to me, not as a success story or a grateful survivor, but as my son's fiancée, a woman with a bruised thumb and a pamphlet from a women's shelter in her purse. And her message was clear. She knew what was happening in this house. She knew what my son was. The question was, what did she plan to do about it? And more terrifying, what did she expect me to do? I looked down at the photograph again, at young Becca's face. At my own face from 20 years ago, a woman who still believed to save people, who didn't yet know that sometimes the people who need saving most are the ones sleeping down the hall. The sun was setting when I finally went inside. The photo clutched to my chest like a secret, like evidence, like a promise. That night, I put the photograph in my nightstand drawer, underneath the stack of old birthday cards and the rosary beads my mother had left me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Michael come home late, hearing him go into his room and close the door. And I understood with perfect, terrible clarity, this wasn't just about Rebecca anymore. This was about all of us, the women we'd been, the women we'd become, and the women we still had the chance to be, if we were brave enough to face the truth. The photograph had been a message. Now I needed to decide how to answer it. The week crawled by like something wounded, each day bleeding into the next with excruciating slowness. Michael announced on Wednesday that Rebecca would be joining us again for Sunday lunch. Not asking, as if my home had become his stage and I was just another prop he could move around at will. "She really loved meeting you, Mom," he said over dinner that night, pushing his chicken around his plate with the kind of restless energy that made me nervous. "She said you reminded her of someone important from her past. Isn't that sweet?" The fork nearly slipped from my hand. "Did she say who?" "No, just that you had a familiar kindness or something." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something calculating in his eyes that made my skin crawl. "You two seem to have connected. That's good. That's really good for us." Us, as if he and I were still a team. As if we were still on the same side of whatever war was being waged in this house. I'd spent every night that week taking out the photograph, studying young Becca's face, trying to reconcile the frightened girl in the image with the composed woman who'd sat at my dining table. I'd drafted a dozen text messages to Michael's phone, pretending I wanted Rebecca's number to share recipes, but deleted them all. Whatever conversation needed to happen between us couldn't happen through screens. It had to be face-to-face, woman to woman, survivor to survivor. Saturday night, I barely slept. I kept imagining different scenarios for Sunday Rebecca, pulling me aside to confess everything. Michael discovering that I knew who she really was. The whole fragile fiction of our family collapsing like a house of cards in a strong wind. By Sunday morning, I was running on coffee and adrenaline. The weather had turned, as it sometimes does in Central California. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and the air felt heavy, electric, like the world was holding its breath before a storm. I made a pot roast again. Michael had insisted on it. Said Rebecca had raved about it all week. But this time, my hands were steadier as I seasoned the meat. This time, I wasn't trying to perform normalcy. I was preparing for battle. I chose a different dress, simple gray cotton one that made me look older, more fragile than I felt. I applied the makeup carefully, covering the faded bruise that was now a sickly yellow-green. But I didn't use the coral lipstick. Instead, I used my own, a muted rose color that Tom had always said brought out the warmth in my eyes. It was a small rebellion, but it felt significant. Rebecca arrived at noon exactly, just as the first drops of rain began to fall. She was wearing jeans this time, and a white blouse that looked expensive, with her hair pulled back in a low ponytail that reminded me achingly of the girl in the photograph. She carried a bakery box tied with string, and that same bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mrs. Morrison," she said. But this time, she didn't extend her hand. Instead, she leaned in and hugged me, and in that brief embrace, she pressed something small and folded into my palm. "I brought dessert. I hope you don't mind. Lemon bars from that new bakery on Chester Avenue." "That's lovely, dear," I managed, closing my fingers around whatever she'd given me. Come in, come in. Michael's just finishing up some work calls upstairs." We stood in the entryway for a moment, rain beginning to patter against the windows, creating a soundtrack of gentle percussion. Rebecca looked around as if seeing the house for the first time, her gaze lingering on the family photos on the wall. Michael at various ages. Tom and me on our wedding day, the three of us at Disneyland when Michael was 6. "You had a beautiful family," she said softly, and the past tense felt like a knife between my ribs. "We did," I agreed. "Once upon a time," Michael thundered down the stairs, then, breaking the moment, he kissed Rebecca on the cheek, took the bakery box from her hands, and ushered us all into the dining room where I'd set the table with the same careful precision as before. But this time, I'd added candle-style white tapers in my grandmother's silver candlesticks. They weren't lit yet, but their presence felt ceremonial, as if we were gathering for something more significant than lunch. We sat in the same positions as last time. Michael at the head, Rebecca to his right, me to his left. The geometry of our conflict, I served the pot roast, the vegetables, the fresh rolls I'd baked that morning. Michael said grace, something he never did unless we had company, and his voice sounded hollow, reciting words about gratitude and blessings. For the first few minutes, we ate in relative silence. The rain had picked up, drumming steadily on the roof, and occasional thunder rumbled in the distance. It felt apocalyptic, biblical, like nature itself was commenting on what was about to unfold. Rebecca picked at her food, taking small bites, chewing slowly. I noticed she'd barely touched the meat, focusing instead on the carrots and potatoes. Michael ate with aggressive efficiency, as if the meal were a task to be completed rather than enjoyed. So, Rebecca, I heard myself say, my voice surprisingly steady. Michael mentioned you said I reminded you of someone. I've been curious about that all week. Michael's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Rebecca's eyes met mine, and I saw a flash of something: fear, relief, determination. Did I say that? She laughed lightly, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her knife. I must have been thinking of my grandmother. She had your same gentle way about her. Is she still alive? Your grandmother? I pressed, knowing I was pushing, unable to stop myself. No, Rebecca said quietly. She passed when I was 17. Right before she stopped abruptly, took a sip of water. Right before I graduated high school, the lie hung between us like smoke. I knew from the photo, from the memories that had returned, that Becca had dropped out of high school, that her life had fallen apart at 17. Michael was watching us now, his eyes moving between Rebecca and me like someone watching a tennis match. Sensing something happening but not quite able to identify what. This pot roast really is incredible, Rebecca said, changing the subject with visible effort. You know what's funny? I once knew someone who used to say that food made with love tastes different, that you can taste the care in every bite. She paused, her eyes locked on mine. But I also learned that sometimes people cook with other emotions. Fear, obligation, desperation. Another pause. I wonder what those taste like. The room fell silent except for the rain and thunder. Michael set down his fork with a clatter that made us both jump. That's a weird thing to say, babe, he said, and his voice had an edge I recognized. The one that came before things escalated. Mom's roast is perfect. Just like last time, right, Mom? It's fine. Honey, I said quickly, automatically falling back into the role of peacemaker that I'd perfected. Rebecca was just making conversation, but Rebecca wasn't done. She set down her own utensils with deliberate care, folded her hands in her lap, and looked directly at Michael with an expression I couldn't quite read. Actually, there's something I need to say. Her voice was quiet but firm, and I felt my heart begin to race. Something I should have said before now. Michael's jaw tightened. Rebecca? Maybe this isn't the time, she interrupted, and her voice was stronger now. I once knew a woman who taught me something important. She said that silence protects the wrong people. That when you stay quiet about things that matter, you're not keeping the peace, you're just letting the violence continue in a different form. The words landed like grenades on the table. Michael's face had gone from annoyed to pale, his eyes darting between us. What the hell is this? What are you talking about? Rebecca reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling, but her grip was firm. Mrs. Morrison, she said, and her voice cracked slightly. Eleanor, I need you to know something. That day at the shelter, when you sat with me and told me I deserved better, that I wasn't crazy for being afraid, you saved my life. Truly saved it. And I promised myself that if I ever got the chance, I'd pay it forward. Michael stood up so abruptly, his chair fell backward, hitting the floor with a crash that made both Rebecca and me flinch. Shelter? What shelter? Rebecca, what the fuck is she talking about? But Rebecca didn't let go of my hand. She held on tighter, and when she looked at me, her eyes were full of tears, but also something else, something fierce and unbreakable. The same shelter, she said, still looking at me even as she spoke to Michael. Where women go when the people who claim to love them hurt them instead. Where they learn that loving someone doesn't mean accepting abuse. Where they remember that they deserve to eat soup, however it comes with salt or without it tanned. Never ever fear what happens when the meal isn't perfect. The silence that followed was deafening. Louder than the thunder, louder than my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Michael's face had transformed into something I barely recognized, rage and panic and disbelief all twisted together. You told her? He said to Rebecca, his voice low and dangerous. You fucking told her. She already knew, Rebecca said simply. She just needed to remember. And you needed to hear someone say it out loud. And in that moment, as the storm raged outside and my son stood there exposed and furious and terrified, I realized that Rebecca hadn't come back into my life by accident. She'd come back to finish what we'd started 20 years ago. She'd come back to save us both. The moment after Rebecca spoke those words felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. That split second before you realize you're already falling. Michael's face had gone from pale to crimson, the veins in his neck standing out like cords. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and I recognized the stance, the way his weight shifted forward on his feet, the slight bend in his knees. It was the same position he'd taken right before he hit me over the unsalted soup. "You need to leave," he said to Rebecca, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Get out of my house. Now." "It's not your house," I heard myself say, and the words surprised me as much as they surprised him. "It's mine. Your father left it to me." Michael's head whipped toward me, his eyes wild. "Are you seriously taking her side right now? After everything I've done for you? After I've let you live here? Taking care of you? Let me live here." The laugh that escaped my throat sounded strange, disconnected. "Michael, I'm your mother. This is my home. I've been taking care of you, not the other way around." But he wasn't listening. He was pacing now, his hands running through his hair in that agitated way that meant his mind was racing, spiraling. I'd seen this before, the manic energy that came when he felt cornered, when his carefully constructed reality began to crack. "This is insane," he muttered, more to himself than to us. "This is fucking insane. You planned this. This whole thing. You've been working together to make me look like some kind of monster." Rebecca stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Nobody's making you into anything, Michael. We're just saying out loud what's been happening in silence." "Shut up." The words exploded from him, and he grabbed a plate from the table, hurling it against the wall. It shattered with a sound like breaking bones, pieces of china scattering across the hardwood floor like shrapnel. The pot roast remnants slid down the wall, leaving a greasy streak. I stood frozen, my body remembering every time I'd witnessed his rage, every time I'd made myself small and quiet and accommodating, hoping to ride out the storm. But Rebecca didn't freeze. She moved toward me, positioned herself slightly between Michael and me, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. "We're leaving now, both of us. And you're not going to stop us?" "The hell I'm not." Michael moved toward the doorway, blocking our exit. "Nobody's going anywhere until we talk about this like adults. Until you both apologize for this ambush, for trying to destroy my life with your lies and manipulation. Move, Michael." Rebecca's voice was quiet but firm. "Or what?" He stepped closer to her, looming over her smaller frame. "What are you going to do, Becca? Call the cops? Tell them what?" That I raised my voice. That I broke a plate in my own house. The rain outside had intensified, sheets of water pounding against the windows. Thunder cracked directly overhead, so loud it rattled the glass in the frames. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. "I need you to understand something," Rebecca said, and there was something in her tone that made even Michael pause. 20 years ago, a man who claimed to love me put me in the hospital, broke 3 of my ribs, fractured my jaw, gave me a concussion so bad I couldn't read for 6 months. And you know what he said afterward? He said it was my fault, that I'd pushed him to it, that if I'd just been better, more careful, more grateful, he wouldn't have had to hurt me. She took a breath, and I saw tears streaming down her face, but her voice never wavered. And I believed him. I believed him because I was 18 and scared and alone, because my parents had thrown me away, because I didn't know that love wasn't supposed to feel like walking through a minefield. I believed him until a police officer found me on the side of the road and took me to a place where women told me the truth, that none of it was my fault, that I deserved to be safe, that choosing someone who hurts you isn't love. It's survival instinct gone wrong. Michael's expression had shifted from rage to something else, confusion, maybe fear. "I've never put you in the hospital. I've never, not yet," Rebecca interrupted. "But you grabbed my wrist so hard last week, you left bruises that look like fingerprints. You threw your phone at the wall next to my head 3 days ago and told me I was lucky it wasn't my face. You've been escalating, Michael. And I've been making excuses, telling myself it was stress, that you'd never really hurt me, that I could handle it." She shook her head. "I've heard this song before. I know how it ends." I watched my son's face as he processed her words, saw the denial and justification war with something that might have been shame. For a moment, just a brief, flickering moment, I saw the little boy he used to be. The one who'd cried when he accidentally stepped on a caterpillar, who'd brought me dandelions and called them flowers. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and his voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean the medication makes me. I can't always control the medication doesn't make you do anything," I said, finding my voice again. "I've watched you, Michael. You control it just fine at work, with your boss, with people you want to impress. You only lose control with people you think can't fight back, with people you think have to stay." His eyes snapped to mine, and the vulnerable boy disappeared, replaced by cold calculation. "You're going to regret this, Mom, both of you. You have no idea what you're doing, what this will cost you." "We know exactly what it will cost," Rebecca said. She pulled out her phone from her purse with shaking hands. I'm calling us an Uber. We're leaving, and you're going to let us go. Because if you don't, I will call the police. And unlike 20 years ago, I have evidence now. Photos of the bruises, text messages you've sent me, voice memos of our fights that I've been recording for the past month. The color drained from Michael's face. You've been recording me? I learned to protect myself, she said simply. I learned to document everything, to build a case, to never be caught without proof again. It's what survivors do. Michael, we learn. The standoff lasted for what felt like hours, but was probably less than a minute. Michael stood in the doorway, his body tense, his mind clearly racing through options and consequences. I could see him calculating, weighing his rage against the threat of exposure, his desire for control against his fear of losing everything he'd built at work. Finally, he stepped aside. Get out, he said, his voice flat and dead. Both of you. And don't come back. Rebecca grabbed my hand, and we moved toward the door together. I didn't stop to get my purse, didn't grab a coat despite the rain. I just held onto her hand and walked toward the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. As we passed him, Michael grabbed my other arm, not hard, just enough to stop me. Mom, he said, and his voice was pleading now, desperate. Don't do this, please. I'm your son. I'm all you have left. I looked at him and saw clearly for the first time in months the man he'd become. Not the child I'd raised, not the boy I'd loved unconditionally, but this stranger who'd learned to weaponize my love, who'd turned my home into a prison. You're not all I have left, I said quietly. I have myself. I'd forgotten that. I'm remembering now. I pulled my arm free, and Rebecca and I stepped out into the rain. The door slammed behind us with a finality that felt like the end of everything I'd known. We stood on the porch, water soaking through our clothes immediately, and I started to shake not from cold but from the sheer magnitude of what had just happened. My phone, I said, suddenly panicking. My wallet, my medication, everything is still inside, we'll get it later, Rebecca said, pulling out her phone and typing rapidly. When he's not there, when it's safe. Right now, we just need to leave. A car pulled up 3 minutes later, a gray Toyota with an Uber sticker in the window. The driver, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, took one look at us standing there, drenched and shaking, and didn't ask any questions. She just unlocked the doors and said, "Where to?" Rebecca looked at me, and I realized I had no answer. Where does a 62-year-old woman go when she's just walked out of her own home, away from her only child, with nothing but the clothes on her back? The Marriott on Truxton, Rebecca said, downtown. As we pulled away from my house, from the home where I'd raised my son, where I'd buried my husband's ashes in the rose garden, where I'd spent 35 years building a life, I looked back through the rain-streaked window. Michael stood in the doorway, backlit by the dining room light, watching us leave. Even from a distance, even through the rain and the gathering darkness, I could see his face. And what I saw there wasn't rage anymore. It was fear. Because maybe, for the first time in his life, Michael realized that the women he'd counted on to always be there, to always forgive, to always stay silent, had finally found their voices. And once you hear a woman speak her truth, you can never again pretend she doesn't have one. The hotel room smelled like industrial cleaning solution and other people's lives. Rebecca had paid for it with her credit card, a double room with 2 queen beds, generic landscape prints on the walls, and a view of the parking lot where rain continued to hammer down like divine judgment. We stood there dripping onto the beige carpet. 2 women who'd just escaped something but hadn't yet figured out what we'd escaped into. You should get out of those wet clothes, Rebecca said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. I'll call the front desk and see if they can send up some hotel robes. I nodded but didn't move. I couldn't stop shaking a full-body tremor that had nothing to do with being cold and everything to do with the adrenaline crash that was hitting me like a tidal wave. I'd just walked out on my son, my only child, the person I'd grown inside my body, nursed through fevers and nightmares, loved with a ferocity that had defined my entire adult life. Eleanor. Rebecca's hands were on my shoulders, gentle but firm. Hey, look at me. You're in shock. We need to get you warm and dry, okay? She guided me to sit on the edge of the bed, then disappeared into the bathroom. I heard water running, and she emerged with a stack of white towels. She wrapped one around my shoulders like a cape, then knelt in front of me and began unlacing my soaked shoes, sensible beige flats that I'd worn to serve Sunday lunch to my son and his fiancée. That felt like a lifetime ago now, though it had been less than 2 hours. I left everything, I said, and my voice sounded distant, disconnected. My medication? My phone? Tom's ashes are in the rose garden. the photo albums, my mother's jewelry, everything. We'll get it back, Rebecca said, easing off my shoes and peeling away my wet socks. Tomorrow, when he's at work, we'll go back with a police escort if necessary. Right now, the important thing is that you're safe. Safe. The word felt foreign, like something I'd forgotten the meaning of. Rebecca disappeared again and returned with a hotel robe, helped me out of my wet dress like I was a child who needed assistance. I let her, too exhausted to feel embarrassed. She wrapped me in the robe, then rubbed my hair with a towel, her movements efficient but tender. When I left my ex, she said quietly, I left with nothing to, just the clothes on my back and a plastic bag with my toothbrush. I didn't even take my birth certificate, my social security card, nothing. I was so terrified he'd come after me that I just ran. And for weeks afterward, all I could think about was the stuff I'd left behind. My grandmother's quilt. This stupid ceramic dog I'd had since I was 8. Photos of my little brothers. She sat down beside me on the bed, and I noticed for the first time that she was shaking too. But you know what I learned? She continued. All that stuff was just stuff. It was weight I'd been carrying, ties that kept me tethered to a version of my life I needed to leave behind. And eventually, I built a new life. Got my GED, then my bachelor's, then my master's, made new memories, bought new things that nobody had ever used to control me. But Michael isn't an ex-boyfriend, I said, my voice cracking. He's my son, my baby. How do you just walk away from your own child? Rebecca took my hand, and her palm was warm against my cold fingers. You don't walk away from your child, Eleanor. You walk away from someone who's hurting you. Those are two different things. And maybe by leaving, by showing him there are consequences, you're actually being more of a mother than you were by staying and enabling it. I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe that what I'd done was an act of love rather than betrayal. But all I could see was Michael standing in that doorway, watching us drive away, and the fear in his eyes that might have been the first real emotion I'd seen from him in months. We ordered room service soup and sandwiches that neither of us ate much of. Rebecca called someone, spoke in hushed tones about taking a few personal days, and I realized she was risking her job for me. At some point, she went down to the hotel gift shop and came back with toothbrushes, toothpaste, a cheap t-shirt, and sweatpants in my size. Try to sleep, she said around 10 o'clock. I'll stay awake, keep watch. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. Her face was grim. I know how this works. I know the panic that comes after the rage, the remorse, the desperate need to fix things. He'll try to find us. Maybe not tonight, but soon. She was right. At 11:47 p.m., my phone, which I'd left on the kitchen counter, started ringing. I knew because Rebecca's phone lit up with a call from Michael. She rejected it. It rang again and again. Then text messages started coming through, one after another, lighting up her screen like desperate fireworks. I'm sorry, please answer. We need to talk. You're making this worse than it is. Mom's medication is here. She needs it. This is insane. Just come home, Rebecca, please. I love you. Don't do this to us. Rebecca turned her phone off entirely and set it face down on the nightstand. At 2:47 a.m., my eyes finally closed. I dreamed of Michael as a little boy, standing in the rain, calling for me. In the dream, I kept walking away, and his voice got smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely, and I woke up with tears streaming down my face. The phone call came at 6:23 a.m., not to Rebecca's phone, which was still off, but to the hotel room phone, the old-fashioned landline that I hadn't even noticed on the nightstand between our beds. The shrill ring shattered the gray morning silence. Rebecca and I stared at each other across the space between the beds, both of us knowing exactly who it was, neither of us wanting to answer. It rang 12 times before stopping, then started again immediately. On the third cycle, Rebecca picked up. She didn't say hello, just held the phone to her ear and waited. I could hear Michael's voice, tinny and desperate, even from my bed. Rebecca, Rebecca, please, I know you're there. I need you to listen, please. I'm listening, Rebecca said, her voice flat. There's been an accident. His words came fast, tumbling over each other. I'm at Mercy Hospital. I got into a fight. There was this guy at Murphy's bar, and he said something about Mom, and I just lost it, and things got out of hand. And now his voice broke. I'm hurt bad, Rebecca, and I'm scared. I'm so fucking scared. Rebecca's eyes met mine. I saw her weighing the truth against the manipulation, the reality of his pain against the pattern of his control. What do you want me to do, Michael? She asked finally. Come here. Bring Mom, please. I need to sound like a sob. I need my family to know you're not gone. I can't do this alone. Rebecca covered the mouthpiece and looked at me. "It's your choice," she said quietly. "We can go, or we can stay here. But you need to know this is probably manipulation. This is probably the part where he makes himself the victim, so we come running back." I thought about Michael as a little boy with a scraped knee, how he'd always run to me for comfort. I thought about him in the hospital after he broke his arm falling from the oak tree, how small he'd looked in that bed, how he'd reached for my hand. But I also thought about the woman I'd seen in the mirror yesterday before we left, the one with fading bruises under her makeup, the one who'd forgotten she had a choice. "We'll go," I said, "but we go together, and we don't stay." The hospital was a 15-minute drive. Rebecca called the Uber while I dressed in the clothes from the gift shop. In the car, neither of us spoke. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray, heavy with the threat of more to come. Mercy Hospital emergency room at 7 a.m. on a Monday morning was exactly as depressing as you'd imagine, fluorescent lights that made everyone look jaundiced, the smell of antiseptic mixed with vomit, the sound of someone crying behind a curtain. We found Michael in basics. His face was a mess, one eye swollen shut, a gash across his forehead held together with butterfly bandages, his bottom lip split and crusted with dried blood. His right hand was wrapped in a cast, and when he saw us, something crumpled in his expression. "Mom," he said, and he sounded 5 years old. I stood at the foot of his bed, Rebecca beside me, and looked at my broken son. "What happened?" I asked. "I told you, there was a fight. This guy at the bar, he was talking shit, and he stopped, looked away. I don't know. I just snapped. And he was bigger than I thought, and he had friends, and it all happened so fast." A nurse appeared with discharge papers, barely glanced at us. "You're free to go, Mr. Morrison. Follow up with your primary care physician in 3 days. Keep the hand elevated and dry. Take the pain medication as prescribed, not more." Michael nodded, wincing at the movement. The nurse left, and silence filled the small curtained space. "I need help getting home," Michael said finally, looking at me. "They won't let me drive with this medication. And I can't be alone right now, Mom. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry I scared you. I'm sorry I hurt you. Please don't leave me here." And in that moment, I saw it so clearly, the choice every mother of a destructive son has to make. Love him by enabling him, by absorbing his damage, by sacrificing yourself on the altar of his comfort. Or love him by setting a boundary, by showing him that actions have consequences, by saving yourself even if it means watching him fall. I looked at Rebecca, at this woman who'd survived, who'd rebuilt, who'd come back into my life to show me that escape was possible. Then I looked at my son, broken and bruised and begging. "No," I said. The word hung in the air between USC's small, simple, absolute. Michael's one good eye widened. "What?" "No," I repeated, and this time my voice was stronger. "I'm not taking you home. I'm not coming back. Rebecca will call you an Uber, and you'll figure it out. Just like millions of people figure things out every day without their mothers to clean up their messes." His face transformed, the vulnerability evaporating, replaced by that cold calculation I'd seen too many times before. "You're seriously going to abandon me here? After I got beaten up defending your honor?" Nobody was talking about me at Murphy's bar at midnight on a Sunday, Rebecca said quietly. "We both know that's not what happened." Michael's jaw clenched, and I saw the lie crumble. "Fine, you want the truth? I went to the bar because I was upset, because my mother and my fiancé ambushed me in my own home, treated me like some kind of criminal. I had a few drinks, maybe more than a few, and yeah, I got into it with some guy over a pool game. But it doesn't change the fact that I'm hurt, that I need help." "You need help," I interrupted. "That part is true. But not the kind of help I can give you anymore. Not the kind where I enable your behavior and pretend everything's fine and cover up your bruises the same way. I cover up my own." I stepped closer to his bed, and something must have shown on my face because he actually leaned back slightly, as if I were the dangerous one now. "Do you know what I found in your nightstand drawer?" I asked, "when I went into your room looking for answers." His face went pale beneath the bruises. "You went through my stuff. I found your notebook. The one where you wrote about Rebecca, about how her baggage from the shelter made her less likely to leave when things get difficult. Those were your exact words, Michael. You chose her because you thought her trauma would make her easier to control." Rebecca's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the small curtained space. "That's not true, or twisting it," Michael stammered. "I was just processing, trying to understand my own feelings." "You can't use private thoughts against someone. Private thoughts become actions," I said. "And your actions have consequences. You hit me over unsalted soup. You've grabbed Rebecca hard enough to leave fingerprints. You've thrown things. broken things, created an atmosphere of fear in a house that used to feel like home. And every single time, you found a way to make it our fault, to make yourself the victim. Tears were streaming down his face now, mixing with the dried blood. And part of me, that mother part that had defined me for 37 years, wanted to reach out, to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay. But Rebecca's hand found mine, and I held on tight. "When you were born," I said, and my voice was shaking now too, "the nurse placed you in my arms, and you were so small, so perfect. And I made a promise that I would protect you from anything that could hurt you. I would love you unconditionally forever, no matter what." Michael nodded, hope flickering in his expression. "Exactly. That's what mothers do. They don't abandon their children when I'm not finished," I said firmly. What I didn't understand then, what I'm only learning now, is that unconditional love doesn't mean accepting unacceptable behavior. It doesn't mean sacrificing myself to enable your worst impulses. And it doesn't mean pretending you're still that perfect baby when you've grown into a man who hurts people. I took a breath, steadying myself for what came next. "I love you, Michael. I will always love you. But I can't be around you anymore. Not like this. Not while you're refusing to take real responsibility for your actions. Not while you're using your disorder as an excuse instead of a reason to get serious help." "I'll get help," he said quickly, desperately. "I'll go back to my psychiatrist, I'll adjust my meds, I'll do whatever you want. Just don't leave me. Please, Mom, you're all I have." "No," Rebecca said, speaking for the first time in minutes. "She's not all you have. You have a good job, health insurance, resources. You have options. What you don't have anymore is two women willing to absorb your damage." She pulled something from her purse, a manila envelope that I hadn't noticed before. She placed it on the rolling table beside Michael's bed. "These are copies of everything," she said. "Photos of the bruises, transcripts of the voice memos I recorded, a timeline of incidents over the past 3 months. I made copies for your HR department, for the police if it comes to that, and for my lawyer." Michael stared at the envelope like it was a bomb. "You can't if you go to my work, you'll destroy my career. Everything I've built, everything you've built on the foundation of women too afraid to speak up," Rebecca finished. "I'm done being afraid, Michael, and I'm done being engaged to you." She pulled the ring off her finger, modest diamond solitaire that caught the harsh fluorescent light band, set it on top of the envelope. "I'll have my things out of your apartment by the end of the week. Don't contact me. Don't come to my work. If you do, I'll file a restraining order." The silence that followed was broken only by the sounds of the emergency room beyond our curtain monitors beeping. Someone calling for a doctor, the everyday chaos of people in crisis. Michael looked between us, and I watched the reality settle over him. "This is really happening. You're really both just done with me. We're done accepting abuse." I corrected gently. "There's a difference. If you get real help, not just medication adjustments, but actual therapy, actual accountability, maybe someday we can have some kind of relationship. But it will be different. It will have boundaries. And I won't live in your house anymore, won't be available for you to take out your frustrations on when life gets hard. Where will you even go?" he asked. And despite everything, there was genuine confusion in his voice, as if he couldn't imagine me existing independently of him. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but that's my journey to figure out. Not yours to control." I reached into the pocket of the cheap sweatpants from the hotel gift shop and pulled out the small folded paper Rebecca had pressed into my palm during that first Sunday lunch. I'd kept it with me, even through everything that followed. I unfolded it, now a card with the name and number of a domestic violence counselor, someone Rebecca had worked with years ago at Haven House. "This is where I'll start," I said, showing it to him. "And there are programs for family members of people with bipolar disorder. Support groups for mothers who've had to step back from their adult children. I'm going to find them. I'm going to learn how to love you from a distance. How to stop setting myself on fire to keep you warm." Michael's face crumpled, and the sobs that came from him were raw, real. The sound of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing. Part of me wanted to go to him. That part will probably always exist. The mother who wants to fix everything, who feels her child's pain as her own. But I stayed where I was, Rebecca's hand in mine, and I let him cry. A doctor appeared then, pulling back the curtain with the efficient manner of someone who'd seen too much human drama to be moved by it. "Mr. Morrison, your discharge papers are ready. Do you have someone to take you home?" "He'll need an Uber," Rebecca said before Michael could answer. "We were just leaving." The doctor nodded, made a note on his tablet, and disappeared again. Michael wiped his face with his uninjured hand, leaving smears of blood and tears. When he looked at us again, something had shifted in his expression. The desperation had hardened into something uglier. "You're going to regret this," he said, his voice cold. "Both of you. When Mom's blood pressure medication runs out and she can't get her prescriptions because she abandoned her home and her insurance information. When you try to file false reports against me and realize I have a dozen colleagues who will testify to my character. When you're alone and broke and realizing that you threw away your family over nothing, it wasn't nothing." I interrupted, "And I'll be fine. Women have been surviving without men's permission since the beginning of time. I'm just a late bloomer." Rebecca and I turned to leave, and Michael's voice followed us. Mom, please, don't do this. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll change. I promise I'll change. Just give me one more chance." But we didn't stop. We walked out of that bay, through the emergency room, past the triage desk and the waiting area full of people with their own crises and emergencies. We walked out into the morning gray and heavy but no longer raining and stood in the parking lot, breathing hard like we'd just run a marathon. "That was the hardest thing I've ever done," I said, and my voice broke on the last word. Rebecca pulled me into a hug, and we stood there holding each other while cars pulled in and out around us, while ambulances arrived with their sirens wailing, while life continued in all its messy, complicated glory. "It was also the bravest," she said into my hair, "and I'm so proud of you." We called an Uber back to the hotel. In the car, I stared out the window at Bakersfield, passing by the city where I'd lived my entire adult life, where I'd raised my son, where I'd built a life that had just imploded. But I also felt something I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. I felt light. Like I'd been carrying a weight so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. And now that it was gone, I was remembering how to breathe. 3 days later, I sat in a small office at Kern County Oil and Gas, waiting to speak with Michael's supervisor. Rebecca had arranged the meeting. She'd called in sick to work a necessary lie. She said Don spent those 3 days helping me retrieve my belongings from the house, with a police escort who stood in the driveway while we loaded boxers into a rental truck, helping me set up a temporary bank account, and making phone calls to people I'd been too ashamed to contact. The police officer who'd accompanied us to the house had been a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She'd seen the broken plate still on the dining room floor, the dent in the wall where Michael had thrown something, and she'd given me her card. "In case you decide to file a report," she'd said quietly, "what you're describing is domestic violence, ma'am. Age doesn't change that. Family doesn't change that." I'd taken the card but wasn't sure I'd use it. Some battles, I was learning, were fought in courtrooms. Others were fought in the quiet act of refusing to return. Now, sitting in this sterile office with its motivational posters about teamwork and integrity, I felt a different kind of nervousness. This wasn't about Michael's violence toward. I still wasn't ready to make that public. Still felt that complicated mother shame of admitting my son had hurt me. This was about Rebecca, about the pattern she'd documented, about making sure that what happened to us didn't happen to someone else. The door opened, and a man entered, tall, maybe 60, with silver hair and the weathered skin of someone who'd spent years working outdoors before moving into management. He extended his hand. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm David Peterson, Michael's direct supervisor. Please, have a seat." He settled behind his desk, and I noticed he'd already pulled up a file on his computer. Rebecca had sent everything ahead, all her documentation, all her evidence. He'd had time to review it. "First, let me say how sorry I am that you're in this position," he began. "As both Michael's supervisor and as a father myself, I can only imagine how difficult this must be." I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. "I've reviewed the materials Ms. Chen sent over," he continued, using Rebecca's last name with professional formality. "And I want you to know that we take allegations of this nature very seriously. Kern County Oil has a zero-tolerance policy for harassment and violence, both in the workplace and in employees' personal lives when it affects their professional conduct." Has he done anything at work?" I asked. "Has he hurt anyone here?" Mr. Peterson's expression grew careful. "I can't discuss other employees' complaints due to confidentiality. What I can tell you is that we've had ... concerns. Incidents where Michael's temper has been an issue. Outbursts during meetings. A confrontation with a colleague that required intervention. We'd attributed it to stress, to his condition, and we'd been working with him on management strategies." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But what Ms. Chen has documented the escalation pattern. The violence outside of work, it paints a more complete picture. And frankly, it explains some behaviors we'd been seeing but couldn't quite connect." I felt something twist in my stomach. "What kind of behaviors?" Nothing that crossed into physical violence here, he assured me quickly. But intimidation tactics. A way of speaking to subordinates, particularly women, that created an uncomfortable environment. We'd counseled him multiple times, but he's very good at maintaining plausible deniability, at making it seem like misunderstandings rather than a pattern. He leaned forward, his voice gentler now. Mrs. Morrison, I need you to understand something. Your son is brilliant at his job. He's brought in major contracts, saved us millions in efficiency improvements. That's what makes this so difficult, separating the professional value from the personal conduct. But we can't ignore this anymore. We won't. What happens now? I asked. Michael has been placed on mandatory leave while we conduct an internal investigation. He'll be required to undergo a fitness for duty evaluation, including psychological assessment. If he wants to return to work here, he'll need to demonstrate that he's addressing these issues through treatment, not just medication management. He pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk to me. These are resources we provide to employees and their families. Therapists who specialize in bipolar disorder and anger management, support groups, programs specifically designed for family members who are setting boundaries with adult children who have mental health challenges. I stared at the folder, tears blurring my vision. He told me I was abandoning him, that I was a terrible mother for not standing by him no matter what. Mr. Peterson's expression softened. Mrs. Morrison, I've been doing this job for 30 years. I've seen brilliant people destroy themselves and everyone around them because the people who loved them couldn't bring themselves to say enough. What you're doing, setting boundaries, insisting on real accountability, that's not abandonment. That's love in its most courageous form. A knock on the door interrupted us. Mr. Peterson called, "Come in." And a woman entered mid-50s, wearing a professional pantsuit, carrying a leather portfolio. Mrs. Morrison, this is Janet Wallace, our head of human resources. She wanted to speak with you as well. Janet sat down in the chair beside me and opened her portfolio. I've been with this company for 23 years, she said without preamble. And I've seen too many situations where we failed to act quickly enough, where we prioritized an employee's talent over the safety and well-being of others. We're not making that mistake with Michael. She pulled out a document and showed it to Mia, formal complaint filed by another employee, dated 6 months earlier. This was filed by a woman in accounting who worked briefly on a project with your son. She reported that he'd made comments about her appearance, followed her to her car after work to continue a conversation about the project, and sent her late-night text messages that made her uncomfortable. We investigated, talked to Michael, and he claimed it was all innocent, that he was just being friendly, that she was overreacting. Janet's jaw tightened. We gave him the benefit of the doubt. We shouldn't have. 2 weeks later, she transferred to our Sacramento office to get away from him. We lost a talented employee because we didn't take her seriously enough. The room felt too small suddenly, the air too thick. How many others? I asked. That we know of. 3 formal complaints over the past 2 years, but Ms. Chen's documentation suggests a pattern that goes back further and runs deeper than what we've seen at work. Janet leaned forward, her voice intense. Mrs. Morrison, you coming here today? You sharing this information, it's not just about protecting yourself or Ms. Chen. It's about protecting every woman who might cross paths with your son in the future. It's about breaking the cycle before someone gets seriously hurt. I thought about Becca at 18, walking along Highway 99 with a split lip and a duffel bag. I thought about the woman from accounting, transferring offices to escape my son's attention. I thought about all the women I'd worked with at Haven House. All the stories that started with, "I thought I could handle it," and ended with scars, both visible and invisible. What do you need from me? I asked. Just the truth. Janet said simply, whatever you're comfortable sharing about what you've witnessed, what you've experienced, it will remain confidential, used only as part of our internal review. You're not required to do this, you're not an employee here. But your perspective as someone who's known Michael his entire life, who's seen the progression of his behavior, could be invaluable. So I told them, not everything. I still couldn't bring myself to show them the faded bruise on my cheek. Couldn't quite say the words, "My son hit me." But I told them about the escalation, about the unpredictability, about the way he'd weaponized his disorder as an excuse while maintaining perfect control in situations where consequences mattered to him. I told them about Rebecca's bruises, about the recordings she'd made, about the deliberate way he'd chosen her because he thought her past trauma made her vulnerable. And I told them about the notebook entry, the calculated manipulation that proved this wasn't just about a man losing control, but about a man who chose when and where and with whom to lose it. The meeting lasted 2 hours. When it was over, Mr. Peterson walked me to the elevator, and we stood there waiting for the doors to open. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I think you're doing the right thing. I know it doesn't feel like it. I know every instinct you have is screaming at you to protect your child. But sometimes protecting them means letting them face the consequences of their choices." The elevator arrived, but before I stepped in, I turned back to him. "Will you tell Michael I was here? We're required to inform him that we're conducting an investigation and who we've interviewed as part of that process." "So, yes, he'll know." I nodded, feeling the weight of that knowledge settle over me. Michael would know I'd spoken to his employer, had participated in the investigation that might cost him his career. He would see it as the ultimate betrayal. And maybe it was. Or maybe it was the first honest thing I'd done for him in years. Rebecca was waiting in the parking lot, sitting in her silver Honda with the dented bumper, reading something on her phone. When she saw me, she got out and pulled me into a hug without asking how it went, without needing words. "I'm staying at my friend Linda's place," I told her when we finally pulled apart. "Just temporarily, until I figure out what's next. She has a spare room, and she's been widowed for 3 years. Says she's glad for the company." "That's good," Rebecca said. "Really good. What about you? Are you really taking time off work?" She smiled, but it was sad around the edges. "I gave notice yesterday. I can't stay at that company. Not after this. It's too small a town, too interconnected. I'll find something else, maybe in Fresno or even Sacramento. Start fresh somewhere where Michael Morrison isn't part of my daily reality." "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry my son cost you your job, your engagement, your sense of safety." "Stop," she interrupted gently. "None of this is your fault. You didn't make him who he is. You just loved him the best way you knew how. And now you're learning a different way, a harder way, but a healthier one." We stood there in the parking lot of Kern County Oil and Gas. Two women who'd been broken by the same kind of violence, separated by 20 years, now standing together in the wreckage and the rebuilding. "Do you ever stop feeling guilty?" I asked. "For leaving? For choosing yourself?" Rebecca considered this carefully. "The guilt gets quieter," she said finally. "It never disappears completely. At least mine hasn't. But it stops being the loudest voice in your head. Other voices get louder: self-respect, peace, the knowledge that you survived. Those voices eventually drown out the guilt." She checked her watch. "I have to go. Meeting with my therapist in 30 minutes, but call me tonight. I want to make sure you're okay." "I will," I promised. I watched her drive away, then got into my own car, Tom's old Camry that I'd retrieved from the house along with my other belongings. I sat there for a moment, looking at the oil company building where my son had built his career, where his carefully constructed professional persona was now being examined under a microscope. And I realized something. I'd spent 37 years trying to protect Michael from the world. It had never occurred to me that maybe I needed to protect the world from Michael, or that in doing so, I might finally be protecting myself. The end, sometimes the hardest love, is the love that knows when to let go. Eleanor spent 37 years believing that being a good mother meant staying no matter what, forgiving without limits, sacrificing herself on the altar of unconditional love. But what she learned, what Rebecca showed her through their shared pain, is that real love sometimes looks like boundaries. Real love sometimes sounds like the word no. And real love sometimes means walking away from someone you would die for. Because staying means dying slowly, piece by piece, until there is nothing left of you to give. If you were Eleanor, what would you have done? Would you have had the courage to leave your only child, knowing the world would judge you for it? Would you have chosen yourself over the person you brought into this world? These are not easy questions. They do not have comfortable answers. But they are questions we must ask ourselves when love becomes indistinguishable from harm, when loyalty becomes another word for enabling destruction. Eleanor's story reminds us that protecting someone from consequences is not the same as loving them. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is step back and let someone face the truth of who they have become. To everyone watching who has ever felt trapped between love and survival, who has ever wondered if setting boundaries makes you selfish or if staying makes you strong, I see your story matters. Your pain is real, and choosing yourself is not betrayal. It is the beginning of healing. If this story moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and follow our channel for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Comment below and tell me, what lesson will you carry with you from Eleanor and Rebecca's journey? I read every single comment, and your reflections make this community what it is. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here.